'Tis I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue our discussion on the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, 5th edition D&D. I was talking about game mastering and things you'll have to know to be a game master, or to be a little more familiar in what you would have to do to help out your game master in the long run. We were talking about building your campaign world, and there's a little bit more detail that's going to be very important that we're going to go over today. So let's start with it. The style of play you're going to have, because this is going to determine a lot. This is how your game is going to be defined, and the kind of actions your character is going to do, the kind of interactions they're going to have with the world, the levels of various things that are going on. This is the style that you feel like you want to play, but you have to also recognize that your characters, your players really, are going to actually want a style too, and you're going to have to realize that and actively put your style matching theirs. So sometimes you might have to choose a little differently than you would be to change your style just a little bit if it would make your characters happier. Now, there are two main styles of play, and then there's talking about mixing the two. The two main styles, the first one is hack and slash. This is a traditional kind of gameplay mechanic. This is one where there's not a lot of thought process into the game. It's pretty much characters go there, they break down the door, they kill the monsters, get the loot, save the girl if there's a girl, things like that. They're cut forward, smacking, bashing, dungeon crawling, going on adventures, and just doing the things they do best. If you're running a hack and slash game, you're going to want to do things like avoid the nitty-gritty of what they're spending in town. You're not going to have to worry about spending a lot of money. They're going to be getting everything they want through the adventures they're going to do. This is if your team is things like monster hunters, heroes for hire, those sort of things, that they're going out on these journeys for just those reasons. You're not going to dive into a lot of character development, developing NPCs. The interactions will be limited. It's all about the combat and the fighting. You're not going to have your players worry about what's really right and wrong when they're doing it. It's just they're doing it. They're not going to be questioning what they're doing. They're going on the adventure. The second part is immersive storytelling. This one is at the far end of the spectrum. When you get into immersive storytelling, you're probably going to worry less about combat or fighting or anything like that. This is the interaction between your players and the NPCs in the world to develop a story. It's going to drive around more what your players do and choose, and oftentimes will rely more on things like skill and ability checks if they're doing anything that they'll actually have to roll die for. Other times they might not have to roll dice at all in a good chunk of a session, or they might not even have to roll combat dice an entire session. They could roll maybe like one combat die will be rolled per player per session just because you did some kind of like something small in the street. This is a lot things like political intrigue, dealing with things in towns and cities more often, trying to convince a local church to help out with like plague relief. You're not killing anybody in the plague has the plague. No, that's not the point of it. The point of it is having this church and convincing them through your words or little actions with them, perhaps. Maybe not big grand adventures convincing them to do this, but small things in their little section there that's driving them. Little things that is based upon the story itself. More often than not, though, we talk about combining the two of these and finding a balance between the two of them. There's very rare times where you're going to be purely hack and slash and purely immersive storytelling. Usually there's some kind of balance between the two kind of things, that they find a middle ground of you get a little bit of action here and there, but then occasionally dive into areas where you have to interact with PCs. Most games are based around that, and more often than not you will find that balance. And again, it's similar to when you're choosing this playstyle, you're finding the balance that's right for your players in there. You're initially looking to have a game with a certain type of playstyle. You're going to have to ask a whole bunch of questions, which they do list in the book, that you're going to look at and kind of think of the way that you're going to influence and build your game that you're doing, what kind of tones you're going to hit with it, what kind of different things you're going to be adding in order to stick with the style that you want to, and also to make the game world that you wish to reflect. Now, moving on, we do have to talk about some things that are important for your character and then important for your game some more still. The first thing that is important for your characters, which is actually something that a lot of people don't look at directly, is character names. Names, not only of NPCs, but of the characters, are going to be very important. If a character has a ridiculous name, they're not going to fit into the world you're setting, especially if you're putting a serious toned world and not a very silly toned world. If there's some joking and silliness in the world you're building, then Yeah, maybe a silly name might be fine. But it has to feel right and fit in with the tone you're trying to build in the world. And if someone's trying to put their name for their character that you do not think fits, let them know and they can change it. They can change it appropriate to whatever sounds like it's going to work. It shouldn't be very carbon copy, cut out kind of things. They don't necessarily need to use the racial names that are suggested for any of the races. They can come up with something on their own, but it should feel like it's going to fit. And that can actually make a big difference when you're talking about the story and the tone of the story and the kind of style you're talking about. If someone's not fitting that overall style, then it's just not going to work. Now let's talk about the type of campaign you're running. You could run an overall campaign or episodic sort of campaign. Overall campaign means I have an ongoing campaign-based overarching storyline that's going on adventure to adventure. Maybe session to session to session. It might just be one giant adventure that they're going on. It could be a lot of little adventures which are all dealing with the same campaign storyline. It's important to establish this relatively early on and have your characters over on a mission path that they're going on over and over again. That's a big option. But the other option, which I just had mentioned, episodic, which you also could do. Episodic would be more like if your characters are adventurers for hire, coming into a town, getting into some shenanigans, getting into some quests, moving on to the next town for the next set of adventures. They could be explorers, where they go to a new land, discover something new. The episodic nature means that you have a couple of sessions or a marathon of sessions that afterwards you're moving on to a new storyline, and they very well could not be connected. They might be. It's completely up to you how well that you connect them together, but you don't need to. It's episodes. Think of episodes of a TV show. There might be ongoing plots between the different episodes of a TV show, but each episode, more often than not, for many of them, contain within themselves. So it's one story within itself that you might have hints that, link it all to all the rest of the stories, but it's not something that's going to happen a lot of. And you could build it exactly like that. Now, we want to talk about the themes you're going to have for your game, because themes are really important. Those are the overarching kind of how serious, how silly, what kind, is it going to be horror, mystery, intrigue? Is it going to be dungeon crawling? That's a theme too, technically. All these things you have to come together and figure out what kind of theme your story is going to be about, your campaign is going to be about. And you want to keep the story fairly consistent throughout the campaign to make it feel like it's interconnected with itself, that it's connecting everything together as you play. It's going to sometimes be difficult to do that, but that is the main goal. That doesn't mean there's any wiggle room. And even in a long campaign, there can be some wiggle room that they could go on when they're doing little adventures here and there. Things could be a little differently. It is so much more easy to do this when you're talking about the episodic ones, because in that one you can have certain themes that are going on, like maybe your characters get into a lot of horror-based situations. That's fine. You don't need to do that. You could have like a more general of like adventuring type theme, and then they get into like a mystery intrigue type adventure. They get into a horror type adventure. They get into a straight dungeon crawl type adventure. That means you have a little bit more wiggle room, and you could add in some smaller themes to the major one which you're keeping across the storyline. And it's that major theme which will also tell you how serious or how joking your games are going to end up being. That's the main point of coming up with a theme like that, because it keeps the level of the game table to whatever level of seriousness is important for your game. Now let's move on and talk a little bit more about characters, because your characters, their level and progression is going to reflect different milestones for developing them and different ways that you're going to have to edit the gameplay and make it feel like those characters belong in that said game. Let's get a little more into this. Let's start with the first example, 1st to 4th level. When your characters are from 1st to 4th level, they just have the basic gear they start out with. They might get lucky and find some common magic items. They start with 1st level spells, then they develop 2nd level spells. They're not like super great, super powerful. These are the heroes of a town or an area. They're the local heroes. That's what their characters should be like. They should be the level of a local hero. They're saving a town. They're helping out a bunch of villagers. They're defeating some bandits. They're doing things which are more locally based and more on the lower side. They're not doing any kind of major epic storyline kind of things. You could hint at an epic storyline even now, but you shouldn't fill their heads with too much, They aren't going to accomplish something ridiculously great at this level. They are starting heroes. They are the beginning of people. They are the first time that they're stepping out to try to do something heroic. From 6 to 10, they're a little more developed. Now we're looking at they might be saving a kingdom, that they might become the heroes of a kingdom, do great things that would help a large swath of an area, a region almost, that they might defeat a small band of orcs that were planning on rising up. They might disrupt what an army is about to do by sabotaging their lines or something like that. They're not going to fight the army directly, but they might do things that will cause a shift in a tide in the battles that are going to be coming. Things like that they make them important. Maybe they take out a key fortress of the enemy that now your people can counterattack. That makes them heroes of the kingdom. It doesn't make them the epic people that would go in there and sweep and do it all themselves. It makes them the people that are jumping in here. Now is when spellcasters are developing more powerful spells, things like fireballs. They get into things like they can do resurrecting. Raise Dead shows up in here. That's the power level we're getting to. So they're beginning to do things which are highly influential. When you move to 11 to 16, things start ramping up. Now you're at the point where they are doing things that would affect an entire kingdom very easily. They're defeating armies on their own at this point in time. They're going out and wiping out armies. They are forming guilds, forming temples of their own, martial orders if they're a fighter. They are doing things that create great influence in the kingdom, and they are the almost leading positions in it oftentimes. Whatever land they are in and they settle in, they form leadership positions just because of their prowess. Maybe not perhaps because they do a lot, just because they can do so much. When you move on to 17 or 20, you are affecting planets or worlds. You are doing things that are very epic, global scale. Maybe an archlich is planning on raising an army of undead and threatening the entire world. You're going against him. You're preventing a demon prince from invading the world. You're doing things that are so epic and world-shattering if your characters do not stop them or deal with them. That is the level you're reaching at when you've hit 17 to 20. You are the legends that people talk about. You're building up to being that. And when they hit 20th level, they are true legends. At this point in time, you should let your characters develop some kind of secret, something that represents their characters, and it's a good excuse for retiring them. A cleric might become a divine servant of their deity and go off to their realm to be one of their right-hand man. A wizard might find the secret of immortality. A fighter could become a king. Gain his own kingdom that he could rule over, a kingdom that he's united through his sheer prowess, things that are fitting with their character but unlock great secrets and responsibilities and acceptances that it's a good way for your characters to retire because they have reached this level of strength and legendary status that very few ever reach. Now, you can have characters start at higher levels when you start a campaign or an adventure. It is an option. Normally, you just make your character as if it's that level. So it's just simple building like that. The only thing that is going to be different is equipment. At certain levels, and depending on the level of magic in your campaign world, they will get different sets of equipment, and there's a chart in the book here that will tell you what kind of equipment you should give your characters. Usually it's going to assume that, what level of magic you want, what level they're going to be. They're in swaths, so that'll just give you the basic information you know. Otherwise, it's just the same as building a character, leveling up to that character over the entire time. It's just as simple to build. You build the base character, just make it of that level. So that's it for today. I went over some of the basics of the themes and styles and settings of your world and talked about it, including your characters into it. I did talk a little bit about the levels that they're going to be at, and even starting at higher levels. Next time, there's still some more game mastering I have to talk about. We'll move into some more interesting information to discuss. But until then, if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel, the Empire, and the work I do. If you want to give any extra support to the Channeling Empire, please check out my Patreon linked in the description below. But until the next time, I bid you farewell.